This moves us to the next woman who feels, well, not all that young. She feels middle-aged. That's what she says about herself. But this may be due to the fact that she's among the more experienced people because she worked with Der Standard in Austria, Stern in Germany, and NZZ in Switzerland, and she helped make sure that the companies could move forward into the digital future. Let us welcome a middle-aged but experienced woman who knows what the change makers in the business are. So let us welcome Anita Zielina. That's my favorite way of being introduced. Great. Now I'd like to introduce my own presentation. One step back, please. I can't see you on the screen here. Maybe your colleagues can change that. Today I would like to briefly talk about how change happens at the level of organizations. And I would also like to share my own personal impressions with you because there is no secret recipe, even though a lot of people have said very intelligent things about this. Whenever I come to an organization, my task is always quite simple. Make us fit for the digital future is what I hear. It's easier said than done. Many of you who are working in the field of digital transformation will know that. In theory, of course, it all sounds very easy and practical. One classic of change management literature, John Kotter, the 8 steps of change that he described. If you use that, then you assume that first you need to create a climate for change within an organization, then you need to engage and enable the organization, so bring people on board and create momentum. And then you move on to a phase where you implement the change and implement it in a sustainable way. And if it sounds so simple in theory, why is it so hard in practice? I have other figures than Philipp Welter brought this morning, but they're quite similar, actually, close enough anyway, to make sure that most of the change initiatives fail. Why is that the case? Well, one reason why these initiatives fail is that very often a process of transformation is only conducted on the surface. And the cultural change, where you really need to put in a lot of work, working with people, well, this is often forgotten. Peter Drucker, and I think he's an important management thinker, philosopher, he says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So even though the strategy may be fitting for the company, without communicating the change, without changing the mindset and culture, without involving the employees and other management levels, this will just go up in smoke and won't work. I have more than 6 learnings about change management in media, so I wanted to focus on the most important learnings when it comes to managing media companies and processes of change in media houses, and I would like to share those with you today. One of the most important misconceptions that I'm often encountering is that when it comes to changing IT processes and technology, that in and of itself is not management of change. Yes, of course, often technological processes and underlying structures lay the groundwork based on which change can build. Often, old, obsolete IT can be an obstacle. But to introduce a customer management system or cool tools or whatever, and then the change is going to happen automatically. People are going to love those changes and are going to adapt to this change. Well, this is an illusion that too many people are still harboring in the media business. It's about bringing on board the employees, the process, and the IT. So if you change all 3, then the change can be sustainable. Another important learning for me personally And this is a pie chart that may look a bit different in every company. So here you see the little part of the organization that is really enthusiastic and that drives the change. Those are the change makers, even before they join the organization. They are like that. And there's a small part that is absolutely against everything, that will never go along, doesn't want the change and opposes it vociferously. And there's a large number of people who are still undecided. They may be closer to the change makers or closer to those who refuse everything outright, but that's the broad mass you can work with. Now, what's really interesting is, it's like in school. You tend, as a teacher, to focus on the bad students, the ones that disrupt, who are opposing the teacher, who are loud, noisy, obnoxious. Well, the problem is that that means you can't work with those who are actually quite motivated and ready to create this momentum and carry it forward. And you also lose the chance of bringing on board most employees who still need a little bit more time, a little bit more communication, and need to be involved more in those processes. That was an important learning for me. Now, communication is about everything. Whenever it came to a process of change, I had the feeling that I have communicated this so often, let's say a strategic initiative or a change of a process, that the employees or colleagues were really upset that we are trying to communicate it yet again. And then I come to an event and somebody tells me, well, I've never heard that before. And then I say, well, come on, we've been communicating this for a year now. So even if you believe that you have really actively communicated everything, and if you yourself can't hear it anymore, well, that's your self-perception. But the way it is perceived by others, by the employees, is often quite different. So this cycle of communication, of listening to the reaction, then adaptation, then communicating it again, this is so enormously important, and it may sound banal, and I wouldn't really emphasize it if media companies weren't really very bad when it came to internal communication, which is hard to believe because we're all in the communication business, more or less. And then quick wins, and balancing quick wins with major objectives, strategic objectives. Every process of change is strenuous for management, for employees, and they're strenuous because it's a marathon. And it is best dividing this marathon up into small segments so that you can make it manageable, digestible, easier to handle for yourself and for your employees. One experience that I found, and when you interview CEOs from other industries or management philosophers, well, it's good to have short-term targets. What do I want to achieve with my team, my organization in the next couple of months? Then medium-term objectives. So what should we reach after 1 year? But still, you need to be focused on your major strategic goals, which are 3 or 5 year goals. I think 3 years are better, because we don't even know what's going to happen in 1 year's time. So you should have these long-term objectives too. This makes the process of change easier to manage, and it also helps you to celebrate success, successful achievement of milestones. The next step is communication and change is based on networking. A process of change works in the way that you communicate this to one person, try to convince this person, and if he or she is convinced, then they will go on to convince others. So you, as a management team, just, nudge people, and then a certain momentum is created, and this should then be self-sustaining. This means that this classical, hierarchical, traditional construct will have to change. So we heard about an autocracy where, well, this only works partially because employees can become creative and flesh things out if you leave them some leeway. And this leeway needs to be provided by the management. And this is an experience that cuts across the entire range of media companies that I'm familiar with. And another point that's important for chief innovation officers or chief digital officers, CEOs, editors-in-chief, if you want to initiate a process of change, well, if you're not inspired yourself, you can't inspire others. You go to meetings, we all know it, your calendar is really filling up, and all of a sudden the year is over, you've done a lot of work, but you never had time to find this inspiration that you're here to share with your fellow employees. So that makes it incredibly difficult, because you're always a role model, of course. At the top management level, of course, you need to remain inspired yourself. You need to look beyond the backyard fence, look to the outside world. And we, as media managers or as executives in this field, this is something that we owe to our employees and to our media houses. Thank you.